My first camera I bought was in 2014, and that was a Sony NEX 6. And from 2016 until about 3 months ago, I was exclusively a Sony fanboy douchebag trash, aka I was a Sony shooter. And I'm not saying that to insult anybody. That's literally what I've been calling myself the past 10 years. And 3 months ago, I had the opportunity to try out a LUMIX S1 Mark II. And mind you, before I got to try out a LUMIX S1 Mark II, I was vehemently making pro Sony videos and really talking a lot of shit about LUMIX. Unfortunately for me, when I tried the LUMIX S1 Mark II and I was able to film my own footage and review it on my own computer, my own, and review the footage on my own computer screen and experience the body and, the system and how it autofocuses and all that stuff, I decided I wanted to switch over to LUMIX. I mentioned this before in other videos, but a lot of things Sony was doing and then seeing where LUMIX was headed and then actually getting to see the difference in quality between the LUMIX S1 Mark II with its 6K open gate, 5.1K 60p open gate compared to my 5-year-old Sony FX3. It just was too glaring for me to ignore. And before I continue, if you're currently on Sony, stay on it. You don't got to switch to LUMIX. You don't got to switch to Nikon ZR or Canon C50 or something. If you know what you're doing, if you know how to light, if you know how to audio, compose and all that stuff, you should have no problems with filming good shit. The fact of the matter is, as old as the FX3 is, it is still a viable video camera today. Matter of fact, most production companies probably still use a bunch of Sony FX6, FX3s and everything. So if that's where you're trying to go into, you're in good shape if you own an FX3. The thing is, for me, I'm completely independent. I'm not looking to work in no production. I just want to do my own shit. So I want the best camera, the best system for me. And right now, LUMIX is it. Now, before I did the switch, one of my biggest things I said to defend, Sony E-Mount was the fact that it has the best lens ecosystem. It has the most lenses available for its mount. And after shooting with LUMIX for the past 3 months and navigating the lenses that are available to L-mount, and one of my biggest knocks on L-mount about a few months back was that it doesn't have lenses. There's not that many lenses for the L-mount system. And then as I was trying to build my lens collection to have it match my Sony E-mount system before, and for context, I film a lot of weddings and I film a lot of corporate interviews, and a lot of times I need 3, 4, 5 cameras at a time. So I'm the type of person who would rather have my whole system match. So I don't have a problem using LUMIX and Sony on one shoot and then just matching the colors in post. It's not a big deal. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to try out, if you're on Sony and you wanted to try LUMIX, or if you're on LUMIX, you want to try Sony or any other brand, it's okay to have multiple camera brands in your kit. It's not that hard to match these days. You don't have to have repetitive focal lengths and lenses on both systems. You could use, one camera for something different and the other camera for something else. So after I filled out my L-mount kit of all the lenses I needed, my main run and gun lens on E-mount was this lens that I still have, the 28-70 f2 GM. GM stands for God Mode. GM stands for Got Money, because everyone thinks GM lenses are the end all be all of lenses, and got money because it's expensive. I replaced that lens with the Sigma 28-45 f1.8 zoom lens. And yes, some of you are going to be like, well, Vu, you get up to 70 with the GM. You can only go up to 45 with the Sigma. And again, context. The only viable video camera for me on Sony is a7S III and FX3. The next thing up is the A1 Mark II. Obviously, you have FX6, right? But that's basically the same thing as FX3 to me. I may not get optically 70 millimeters of this, but the LUMIX S1 Mark II is a 6K camera. It could do 60p full frame. It could do everything full frame that the FX3 can do. But it also could do full 4K in APS-C mode. Whereas the FX3 can't punch into Super 35 APS-C in 4K because it's only 12 megapixel sensor. When you want to do APS-C mode, you end up shooting in 1080p. So because I am able to go into 4K 60p, when I punch in 1.5 times Super 35 mode, APS-C mode on the LUMIX S1 Mark II, I end up getting something equivalent, something around like a 67, 68 millimeter f1.8 in APS-C, which is going to look more like an f2.8 in terms of depth of field. So I can get my 70 here. Or when I'm shooting in 5.1K 60p, I could still punch in a little bit and still maintain 4K resolution and get that additional telephoto reach that I lose out without having the 70 millimeter. And in terms of other lenses, I replaced my Tamron 70-180 on E-Mount with the Sigma 70-200 f2.8. I replaced my 135G Master with a Sigma 135 1.8, the old one. And it's not the best focusing lens. It is definitely bigger, heavier, girthier than it needs to be. But I don't really need that particular focal length lens to be like a really good performer in terms of like autofocus and all that stuff. I just need to get focus and then I could just lock it off because it's a tripod camera. I just needed some type of wide angle. So I got a 16-28 Sigma f2.8 to get my 16 millimeter for like real estate type shoots, you know, and any other wide angle type crap that I need. And then this is extra, but I also got a 24 f2 because that is the focal length I like to use most of the time for these YouTube videos. Right now I'm actually using a 35-1.8, but yeah, my other lens was this GM, this other GM that I still have, which is the 24 millimeter G Master. And this lens doesn't even work anymore, it broke. One day the autofocus just stopped working. Everything electric in this 24 GM just stopped working. And I owned it for like maybe 5 years, 6 years, something like that before it died. So I have realized that the whole notion that E-mount is the strongest, you know, mount, whatever, it doesn't really hold that same weight that it used to for me when I was a Sony shooter. And that was one of my biggest defenses for why the Sony E-mount is the best, and you know, people shouldn't switch away from it. This is coming from someone who at one point owned like 10 G Master lenses. All right, I have the 24 GM, I had a 14 millimeter 1.8 GM, I had a 16-35 GM, both versions 1 and 2. I had 24-70 GM, both versions 1 and 2. I had 85 millimeter 1.4 GM, 135 GM. I had one time had the 70-200 f2.8 GM OG version. I had 35 millimeter f1.4 GM. I had 50 millimeter GM 1.2. I also had a 50 millimeter GM 1.4 that I sold my 1.2 for because the 1.2 is too big. And I have this 28-70 f2 GM. I owned a shit ton of GMs. And then it was for quite a bit of time, I was filming most of my stuff exclusively on primes. It means I was using 35, 50, 85 and all that. And then at one point I just realized like this is way too cumbersome. And I switched to using a 24-70 f2.8 G Master Mark II. And then I just realized that this is just much better this way. I could sacrifice this additional bokeh and low light, whatever, using this 24-70, and it gets me a lot more shot variety, especially run and gun. And then I ended up just not using my primes anymore. It just, you know, sat in the back. And of course, once I got the 20-70 f2, primes just became completely useless for like run and gun filmmaking, documentary shooting or whatever, because basically The GM 2870 Mark II was just more versatile. Now, the reason why I stopped using the GM primes was because there was nothing special about them for me to want to go out of my way to use them. And so what I'm saying is, right now, for you to be a successful filmmaker, I'm talking about like from a video making standpoint, the L-mount system has every lens you can possibly need to be successful at your job. If it is missing anything, and it's because this is like one of those standard lenses, it is missing a 16-35 f2.8. They have an f4, they don't have a 2.8. I have the 16-28 Sigma f2.8, which is a bit of a compromise, but I'm completely fine with that. And I understand that a lot of people really love the 16-35 focal length. And if that's the deal breaker for you, then it is what it is, but it's not for me. I have found the past few months that I'm starting to value lens character, like something special about how the lenses look, how the footage is rendered by the lens, and not by like clinical sharpness or like that 1 millisecond faster autofocus. Because I've already mentioned this before, and I'm not going to talk about it again. I've talked about it in other videos. You could watch those. I feel like for me, for my use, the LUMIX S1 Mark II autofocus for video is better than my Sony FX3 and my Sony ZV-1. That's just my opinion on it. Based on my use case, it is what it is. All of these lenses, especially if they're made specifically for mirrorless, they all autofocus perfectly fine. Especially in Lumix, once it locks in, it would track whatever. It is really sticky. I've had no issues with it. Even right now, I'm using the 7 Artisans 35 f1.8, which I have already talked about and reviewed in other videos. This lens is solid. But what I've been starting to value more is lens character. That's why I've invested in these Blazar Mantis, T2.0 lenses. I have the 50, I have 75, and I have a 35. And I love these lenses. They're manual focus. But when I feel like playing around, I like my lenses to look a certain way. And even when I am filming weddings and stuff, I want to have different looking type of lenses instead of just boring, stale, the same clinical look on every lens. That's why I like to put even, mist filters on my lens just to give it a good additional imperfections. Whatever I can to make the lens look just a little bit more different. Because let's be honest, everybody has a freaking 24-70. Everybody has a 16-35. And generally speaking, when it comes to like the main brands, whether it's Sony, Canon, Sigma, whatever, they're all going to have the standard look. So lenses like the G Master, and for people on Sony, is only really, really 100% valuable for those who shoot sports, because Sony will only allow their own lenses to be able to fully utilize faster frames per second in like their A1 Mark II and A9 III and all that stuff. Thankfully, Lumix doesn't do that. Lumix allows maximum frames per second with whatever lens. So like with this Lumix S1 Mark II, I could shoot 70 frames per second in an electronic shutter with any lens, I feel like. It doesn't have to be like a Sony specific. It doesn't have to be like a Lumix lens. The only thing that is exclusive to only Lumix lenses is cropless electronic stabilization, which only works on Lumix brand lenses. But as you know, Lumix has great IBIS, great electronic stay, with any lens. And it is similar to the crop of like active stabilization on Sony, but it's just better stabilization. Like, I'm not about to sit here and slander Sony GM lenses. They're good. They are great lenses. And obviously E-Mount also has the whole Tamron lineup, right? They have the Sigma lineup, which L-Mount also has. But in terms of like the lenses that you need, everything is available on L-mount. And I'm sorry that I have this rod at my mouth, but there's a lot of reverb in my kitchen because hardwood floors and everything, no carpet. So this is what I have to do to try to avoid this reverb. But there's brands like Viltrox that already has lenses that are far more inexpensive and is just as sharp as their GM versions, such as this Viltrox 85 f2.0 Evo lens, which is 5 or 10% of the cost of the GM version. And granted, it is an f2 and not like a GM 1.4 or something, but Viltrox does have a 1.4 version to, if you really need that 1.4 aperture. But let me be honest with you, at 85 f1.8 f2, that is plenty of subject separation for portraits, which is what 85 is mostly used for. I mean, you're talking about a lens that's like $280 in this 85 Evo lens. So in its own E-mount lineup, there's already third-party lenses that kind of make GM lenses just a bit unnecessary, overrated in a way, if you're not shooting sports. Some may say, well, it's good that E-mount has all of these lenses available to it because, hey, I may not need it, but at least it's there if I, for some reason, wanted it. But that's the same thing I'm going to say about OpenGate, right? Right now I'm filming in OpenGate. Hey, do I need it right now? Probably not, but the option is there for me to use it. So we could use that argument both ways. But regardless, back to lenses, right now I'm using a 7 Artisans 50mm f1.8 on L-mount, and it is also available on E-mount. I believe this lens is also only $280. And in my opinion, it has a lot of character. That's the reason why I'm filming this shot with the 51.8 7 Artisans, because I want to be able to showcase some of the character with this background. But I don't know how successful I am with that, because I did have sunlight earlier and now that sunlight is gone. And if you're curious how I'm filming this and if I have any lighting, I do. I currently have a Sony C300X Mark II. I'm currently using my diffusion sheet inside my office and I didn't want to remove it. So I just found a diffusion from like one of my soft boxes and I just kind of put it on the window to help reflect some light this way. This is the importance of having like a 300 watt light, because right now this thing is on full blast at 300 watts and I need that much output to be able to have enough light to reflect and then bounce all the way back here. Really quick, I'm gonna just turn it off actually to see what it looks like without the light at all. So this is what it looks like with the light turned off. The reason why I want to have the artificial light, even though this room has decent natural light, is because it's still daytime and the sun could peek out the clouds. It's gonna mess with white balance, it's gonna mess with exposure. So if I have a constant light, it will enable me to maintain consistent exposure, but also light me, the subject, more properly while still maintaining details outside, so that I don't have to blow out the windows just to recover, just to brighten up my face. Most importantly, I don't have all day to be filming this video, so it needs to be easy to set up. That's why I really like the Sony C300X, because it's bicolor. It is tiny for a 300 watt light and it's easy to set up. When I use stuff that I like, I just want to share it with you so that, hey, if you're looking into a brighter light, that in a situation like this, you're going to need it. Not too expensive, small, light, compact. I mean, this thing is literally like 20% the size of other 300 watt lights on the market, and it works. One of the best things about being a YouTube douchebag trash content creator is having the connection with the viewer, subscribers, followers. And because of that, content creators, we have a certain amount of influence on people. That's why brands send us stuff. That's why there's sponsors, there's brands invite us to go on trips and all that stuff. It's because we have a connection with our viewers. And as awesome as that is, it is also very hard to navigate because I am just a regular dude. I've been doing videography for the past 10 years. Before that, I was just an accountant for 10 years. And if I was not on social media and I was, a videographer going about my business, filming weddings, filming corporate clients, filming commercial work, doing documentaries and stuff like that, what choices I make with my gear doesn't affect anybody but me and my client, right? So if I change my mind, if I decide to switch cameras, if I decide to switch lenses, if I decide to switch gimbals or tripods, it wouldn't matter, right? The problem is because I'm a tube doucher, YouTube douchebag trash shill tuber, if I go on here and I talk about a specific camera, talk about a specific lens that I like, and I'm telling people that I'm using it, and then I recommend it with links in the description, and you go out and buy it, and then 6 months later, I change my mind and I start using a different lens or a different camera or a different gimbal or tripod, it kind of becomes a problem because somebody 6 months before took my advice, or because they like the way I film videos, they decide to buy, the same type of equipment I use, whether it be cameras, lenses, what have you. And they spent their hard-earned money on that. And then 6 months later, my douchebag ass changed my mind and I started using something different. So when I go on this channel and I start telling people about gear that I use or gear that I like using or something that I had switched to and I decide to change to, I am not encouraging anyone to do what I'm doing. I am not telling people to also switch or whatever the way I do, because I don't think you have to, and I don't think you should. The reason why I like to share the gear that I'm using, and sometimes it comes off as reviews, sometimes it just comes off of me talking about stuff, is because this is what this channel is for. This is for me to talk about my experience being a videographer, running my own business, and sharing with you the gear that I use and what gear helps me and what I recommend at this moment in my life. And if you decided to make a purchase decision on whatever I'm talking about, I would hope that you do your due diligence, watch other videos and stuff available on the same topic, and make your decision that way, because I'm my own person and so are you. Everyone is different. Everyone have their own preferences. Everyone have their own opinions on various things. All right, now I'm just like chilling on my couch and I have the same light just pointed to the ceiling. Again, I'm a YouTube douchebag trash. It's much easier for me to switch than it is for a person who is not like on social media. I have a social media following. Generally speaking, people know me. My credibility could be seen from my YouTube or my Instagram. And then so when I need to sell off old gear to buy new gear when I'm switching, it's a lot easier for me to post things on sale and say, look, I'm a real person. I'm here. You can trust me. It's a lot easier for me to make these sales than when you are a regular videographer out there and you post things up and people don't know you, and then they're less likely to buy your stuff. People are willing to send me a straight up Zelle or Venmo to help me avoid fees from like PayPal or some other method of payment, because I have credibility. They trust that I'm going to follow through on the shipment of a product and the product description is legit and all that stuff, because I'm not, first of all, I keep it a buck regardless. I keep it a buck on this channel. I don't bullshit. And obviously when I'm selling you something, I'm not going to bullshit that either. But it just helps as a dude trying to sell stuff. It's easier for me. The reason why I even started thinking about this is because a lot of people were talking about the Nikon ZR and that you could use an adapter and then you could use E-mount lenses on it. And I'm like, give a shit about E-mount lenses anymore. It's like, I want some more creative lenses. You know, I want lenses that look different. And G Master lenses are not that. They are clinical, they're sharp, they have not many imperfections, and it's great if you're just doing like straight up photography and all that stuff. But as a filmmaker and you want things to look different, you want things to look unique, it doesn't do it for me, you know? And I've mentioned this before. If people think I'm bullshitting or whatever, go back and look at my review of the Sony 28-70 f2 GM got money lens. I said in that video that although I like the versatility, and this is when I was comparing it against the E-mount version of the Sigma 28-45 f1.8. It's like, although I think the GM was the better lens, more versatile because you get to 70, especially on Sony, because I don't have the option to do APS-C crop on the FX3. But yeah, it has the versatility, but I liked the look of the Sigma better. Like if I was filming between 20 and 45 millimeter focal lengths, I prefer the Sigma all the way. You know, it just sadly can't go from 45 to 70, but the GM could. But then I also said, you know, the lens, the GM lens is just too clinical, whereas the Sigma 20-45, it has like a specific look to it, and I was just more drawn to the way it rendered the image, the background bokeh. You know, it has like a nice swirly vintage look to it, even though it's like a zoom. And then when I look at the Sony GM, so it's just like, it's just boring. And then I said this when I was still on the Sony system, and I haven't even touched a Lumix camera at that point. So, you know, it is what it is. And then again, you have lenses like, it ain't all that, you know? And of course, Lumix is going to continue to get more lenses. 7 Artisans is making more lenses. TT Artisans is making lenses. Viltrox is making lenses. Hopefully Viltrox brings over all of their, you know, Pro lineup, their Lab lineup, you know, Evo lineup to L-mount, because there's a growing need for it. And I have a feeling more people are going to switch over to Lumix. And the reason why I even make these videos is like, I want to let people know how good Lumix is, how good the S1 Mark II is, and what Lumix is going to be doing in the future. Like, I know there has been talks about the Lumix S1 Mark II and overheating and all that, but Lumix is working on a firmware update that is going to potentially fix these additional overheating issues that it has. I personally have not had any overheating issues with the Lumix S1 Mark II in any actual shooting situations. The only time I got to overheat again was when I was purposely trying to get overheat for like a YouTube test. But like in terms of using it, even like right now, like it's not even come close to overheating. So it only benefits everyone else if a brand like Lumix can get some more attention, get some more notoriety, and then it gets more lenses, and then people, the consumer, the professional, we're going to benefit because we get better product, better features, and then, you know, the versatility of having all these lenses, and also our 6K, 5.1K, open gate, all that stuff. Great IBIS and all that stuff. And then eventually all these other companies are going to have to step up. Same reason why Canon even decided to make a C50s, because the FX3 was such an influential camera. The ZR, Nikon ZR, FX3 ZVE1, it has the FX3 and the ZVE1 written all over it. you know. And with the Nikon ZR, with their innovation with the screen, hopefully camera companies, including Lumix and Sony and all that, start making better screens on their video-centric cameras. You know, that's all I'm saying. And I'm going to just end the video with this. I don't care what you think, okay? You could sit there and say, oh, you know, Lumix, you know, backed up the money truck to my house, whatever. That's the only reason I'm saying this stuff. You believe whatever you want. You know, I've told many people outside of social media, and I'm going to say it right here, the LUMIX S1 Mark II is the absolute best camera that I have ever used, ever owned. Okay? Mind you, I've never used like some Ari Alexa and Reds and Blackmagic, whatever. Out of the cameras that I've owned, which was all Sony cameras, up to my latest camera that I own from them is a Sony ZV-E1, which is basically a FX3 with AI, whatever, autofocus. The LUMIX S1 Mark II is the absolute best camera body I have ever owned. And that's that. Until next time, lighten up.
Hey, man, where you go?
Oh, I actually just got back from Sony Condo. Spoke to a bunch of creators. Had a great time.
Oh my God, Sony Condo? You're a rat? You say you switched to Lumix?
Come on, bro. You know I always keep it a buck. I brought my LUMIX S1 Mark II with me.
No, man. If you want to be the best, if you want to be professional, if you want to be award-winning, when you sweat, you need to go deep inside.
I am not going deep inside any brand. Matter of fact, I won't grow if I don't try out different things.
It don't matter now. Lumix, Sony, they both trap now.
What are you talking about?
Let me show you. Nikon just announced the Nikon ZR. It has a big screen and it shoots red raw. Canon C50, it has Canon color shine. Plus it shoots open game, much better than FX3 and LUMIX S1II Mark II.
Not gonna lie, they're nice cameras, and I'm not trying to slander camera brands or anything like that. First of all, the LUMIX S1 Mark II can do 5.1K 60p full frame open gate. The Canon C50 could only do open gate up to 30p. And the file sizes are the size of my turd after eating Indian food for a week. And the Nikon ZR, it doesn't do open gate at all right now. Sure, it could shoot red raw or whatever, but the non-raw footage, kind of looking subpar in my opinion. Secondly, the Canon C50 looks like the FX3 has gone deep inside Canon for the past 5 years, and finally, Canon gave birth to the C50. And the Nikon ZR, it looks like the Sony FX3 and the ZV-E1 and the LUMIX S1 Mark II went deep inside Nikon, not sure which one went deeper, and that's where the Nikon ZR came from. So what I'm saying is, if the FX3 didn't exist, you wouldn't even see the C50 or the Nikon ZR.
Sony Lumix rat. The S1 Mark II is still overheat.
Yeah, the firmware update is coming. But like I always say, nothing is overheating more than your hot ass fish sauce breath.
Oh my God.